everyone. Welcome to another episode for with Lit with Lenin Reloaded. Last week there was a family emergency and Janet couldn't join, so that's why we didn't have an episode. But this week we're going to continue where we left off.
Yes. So I just so I have it straight, like basically we started part one of a big long title that I can't remember what the title is. Hold on. So we started part one of what the Friends of the People, in quotations, are and how they fight the Social Democrats. And what I took from it is that this guy, Mikkel Vowski, is completely just not understanding what Marx was saying in Capital, and Lenin is setting the record straight about understanding that it's a science, and like him not understanding that like what Marx put forward was like this science to look at the history, and this guy was just like upset that Marx didn't write, look at everything in history or something. Like it was just like not understanding that it was the science and not just him writing history, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly that. Well, no, he was disingenuous because Marx is often mislabeled and mischaracterized on purpose often. Because actually even Michael Parenti wrote about it in the Anti-Communist Impulse, where, for example, a vision is not exactly a prescription. Like a vision of a proletariat revolution is not the same as hey, we're gonna fund every revolution in the world right now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's funny. So I was like, it's very interesting. I was researching for my book, and I was looking at what like various Westerners said about Bolshevism, and it was amazing. Winston Churchill compared it to a disease. Woodrow Wilson too. He called it a poison, and then he called it a disease. And so it shows how they're really worried about the people they oppress striking back, rising up. And yeah, it's very I don't know how that's relevant to this, but but then they based it on really crazy quote mining and most ridiculous interpretations of the most innocuous quotes by Lenin and Marx.
Yeah, just like getting the quote, like taking them out of context and
well, not even that, just like if Lenin says hi, there's a hi, that's a secret. It's kind of really just insanity. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've seen them use like in anti-communist quotes, like use quotes from Marx and Lenin that they were using quotes from other people, and they're attributing it to like Marx and Lenin saying, "Oh, they said this." Like I've seen that a couple of times.
Oh yeah, and then they've also seen anti-communists make up completely non-existent Lenin quotes. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said something about Lenin calling people parasites and insects. I searched in English. I searched in Russian. I looked at those volumes. He'd never called anyone a parasite or an insect. That's Fidel Castro, though. He called them. That's really funny. He called the gusanos hijos de parasitos, which means sons of parasites, as in they're not just parasites. They're like worse than parasites because they're sons of parasites.
I don't think Castro is wrong. No,
no, he's not. It was really funny. Hijos de parasitios. That was a very funny thing because, like, that means they're more parasitic than parasites. But so Castro did call gusano means worm. Yeah. But Lenin didn't call anyone. It doesn't matter. But yeah, in Zolzin, he makes up so many fake Lenin quotes, and Lenin is the easiest person to verify whether he actually said it or not, because there are 45 volumes in English and 55 volumes in Russian. English volumes are just thicker of everything he said, so you can totally
analyze
see if he said it or not.
All right. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I
Then?
forgot where we left off though.
All right, I know exactly where we are. We're at a quotation. It starts, no wonder.
Hold on. Section 1?
Yep, part 1.
Okay, let me find it. No wonder, the conclusion runs, 40 years after the announcement of the theory which claimed to elucidate the world history, ancient Greek, Roman, and German history were still unsolved riddles for it. And the key to these riddles was provided, firstly, by a man who had absolutely no connection with the theory of economic materialism and knew nothing about it. And secondly, with the help of a factor which was not economic, a rather amusing impression is produced by the term production of man himself, i.e. procreation, which Engels seizes upon in order to preserve at least a verbal connection with the basic formula of economic materialism. He was, however, obliged to admit that for many ages the life of mankind did not proceed in accordance with this formula. Your method is a controversy, indeed a wonder. Mr. Mikhailovsky, the theory was that in order to elucidate history, one must seek the foundations not in ideological, but in material social relations. The lack of factual material made it impossible to apply this method to an analysis of a certain important phenomenon in ancient European history, for instance, that of a Gentile organization. The Gentile clan of organization society, this was a system of primitive communism or the first social economic formation in human history. When the clan system began to take shape, when the modern type of man was fully formed, the clan community was a collective unit of blood relations united by its economic and social ties. In its development, the clan system passed through 2 periods, matriarchy and patriarchy. Patriarchy came to an end when primitive society became class society and the state emerged. The basis of production relations in the primitive communal society was the social ownership of the means of production and the equal distribution of products. In the main, this corresponded to low levels of development of the productive forces and to their character at that period. Stone implements and later bow and arrow ruled out the possibility of men combating natural forces and wild animals individually. See System of Primitive Communism. See Karl Marx, Synopsis of L.H. Morgan's Ancient Society, and Frederick Engels, The Origin of Family, Private Property, and the State. Which, in consequence, remains a riddle. Lenin's annotation. Here, too, Mr. Mikhailovsky does not miss an opportunity of pulling faces. What, he says, do you mean a scientific conception of history, yet ancient history remains a riddle? Mr. Mikhailovsky, take any textbook and you will find that the problem of gentle organization is one of the most difficult and has evoked a host of theories in explanation for it. But then the wealth of material collected by Morgan in America enabled him to analyze the nature of Gentile organization. He came to the conclusion that its explanation must be sought not in ideological, legal, or religious, but in material relations. Obviously, this fact is a brilliant confirmation of the materialist method and nothing more. And when Mr. Mikhailovsky flings a reproach at this doctrine that firstly, the key to a very difficult historical riddle was founded by a man who had absolutely no connection with the theory of economic materialism, one can only wonder at the degree to which people can fail to distinguish what speaks in their favor from what severely trounces them. Secondly, argues our philosopher, procreation is not an economic factor. But where have you read in the works of Marx or Engels that necessarily spoke of economic materialism? When they described their world outlook, they called it simply materialism. Their basic idea, quite definitely expressed, for instance, in the passage from Marx quoted above, was that social relations are divided into material and ideological. The latter merely constitute a superstructure on the former, which takes shape independent of will and consciousness of man as the result, the form of man's activity to explain its existence. The explanation of political and legal forms, Marx says in the passage quoted, must be sought in the material condition of life. Mr. Mikhailovsky surely does not think that procreation relations are ideological. The explanation given by Mr. Mikhailovsky in this connection is so characteristic that it deserves to be dwelt on. However, much we exercise our ingenuity on the question of procreation, he says, and endeavor to establish at least a verbal connection between it and economic materialism, however much it may be interwoven in the complex web of phenomenon of social life with other, including economic phenomena. It has its own psychological and psychical roots. Are you telling babes and sucklings, Mr. Michalowski, that procreation has physiological roots? Who do you think you're fooling? And this reminds us that the theoreticians of economic materialism fail to settle accounts not only with history, but also with psychology. There can be no doubt that gentile ties have lost their significance in the history of civilized countries. But this can hardly be said that the same assurance of directly sexual and family ties. They have, of course, undergone considerable modification under the pressure of increasing complexity of life in general. But with a certain amount of dialectical dexterity, it might be shown that not only legal but also economic relations themselves constitute a superstructure on sexual and family relations. We shall not dwell on this, but nevertheless it would point to the institution of inheritance. At last, our philosopher has been lucky enough to leave the sphere of empty phrasemongering. Okay, here's this Lenin note on phrasemongering. By what other name, indeed, can one call the device by which materials are accused of not having settled the account with history without, however, an attempt being made to examine a single one of the numerous materialist explanations of various historical problems given by materialists, or by which the statement is made that we could prove it, but we shall not bother about? And approach facts, definite facts, which can be verified and make it less easy to fool people. About the essence of matter. Let us then see how our critic of Marx shows that in the institution of inheritance, is a superstructure on sexual and family relations. What is transmitted by inheritance, argues Mr. Michalowski, is the product of economic production. The products of economic production? How literate, how sonorous, what elegant language. And the very institution of inheritance is to a certain degree determined by the fact of economic competition. But firstly, non-material values are also transmitted by inheritance, as expressed in the concern to bring up children in the spirit of their fathers. So upbringing of children is part of the institution of inheritance? The Russian Civil Code, for example, contains a clause that a parent must endeavor by home upbringing to train i.e. their children, morals, and to further the aims of government. Is that what our philosopher calls the institution of inheritance? And secondly, even confirming ourselves solely to the economic sphere, if the institution of inheritance is inconceivable without the products of production transmitted by inheritance, it is just as unthinkable without the products of procreation, without them and without that complex, intense psychology which directly adheres to them. Do pay attention to the language. A complex psychology adheres to the product of procreation? That is really exquisite. And so the institution of inheritance is a superstructure on family and sexual relations because inheritance is inconceivable without procreation. Why, this is a veritable discovery of America. Until now, everyone believed that procreation can explain the institution of inheritance just as little as the necessity for taking food can explain the institution of property. Until now, everyone thought that if, for instance, the era of a fief system nourished in Russia, that the land was not transmissible by inheritance because it was only regarded as conditional property. The explanation was sought in the peculiarities of the social organization of the time. Mr. Michalowski presumably thinks that the explanation of the matter is simply that the psychology which adhered to the product of procreation under the fief holder of that time was distinguished by insufficient complexity. Okay, the fief pomistya system, the specific system of feudal land ownership that arose and became firmly established in Russia around in the 15th and particularly in the 16th century. The fief system was closely bound up with the formation of a centralized state and the establishment of a centralized army. Fief lands was to be considered the property of a feudal ruler, were distributed by the government among those who served in the armed forces or at the court. The amount of land received depended on the duties of the landholder. The fief as district from Votchina, the absolute hereditary landed property of the boyar, was conditional and temporary property of the noblemen who had rendered these services. It was pretty. Basically, they would the czars would hire mercenaries, and after the mercenaries would provide the rule, they were like, okay, you can have that land over there in the Donbass area. Okay, you can get that land near Kazakhstan, and and they would just hand out big land grants to these nobles.
Yeah. The next line in the thing is Scratch, friend of the people, and he says, from the, paraphrasing the old thing, and it's amazing that Scratch you get a has been around for so long.
Yes, Scratch a liberal and you get a
It's just funny.
Really, to what other meaning can attach to Mr. Michalowski's reflection on the connection between institution of inheritance and the upbringing of children, the psychology of procreation, and so, except that the institution of inheritance is just as external, essential, and sacred as the upbringing of children? True, Mr. Michalowski tried to leave himself a loophole by declaring that the institution of inheritance is to a certain degree determined by the fact of economic competition. But that is nothing but an attempt to avoid giving a definite answer to that question, and a futile attempt at that. How can we give this statement our consideration when we are not told a single word as to exactly what certain degree inheritance depends on competition, and when absolutely no explanation is given on what in fact gives rise to this connection between competition and the institution of inheritance? Actually, the institution of inheritance presumes the existence of private property, and the latter arises only with the appearance of exchange. Its basis is already incipient specialization of social labor and the alienation of products on the market. Oh, and czars in Russia, land is like so not valuable. So the way the czar would give the land grant was always with, you're going to have this land with this many peasants tied to it who are bound to that land. That was how the land became valuable, by the number of peasants who are forced to work there.
Yeah.
Because there's so much land in Russia, anyone can have as much land as they want.
You can have land. You don't have the workers for it, then, or the people there to do the work to work the land, then it's not valuable.
Exactly. Actually, the institution of inheritance presumes the existence of private property, and the latter arises only with the appearance of exchange. Its basis is already incipient specialization of social. Okay. So long, for instance, as all the members of the primitive American Indian community produced in common all the articles they required, private property was impossible. But when the division of labor invaded the community and its members proceeded individually to engage in the production of some one article and to sell it on the market, this material isolation of the commodity producers found an expression in the institution of private property. Both the private property and the inheritance are categories of a social order in which separate, small, monogamous families have already been formed and exchange has begun to develop. Mr. Michalowski's examples prove exactly the opposite of what he wanted. Mr. Michalowski gives another factual reference. This is too a gem in its way. As regards to Gentile ties, he says, continuing to put materialism right, they paled in the history of civilized peoples, partly, it is true, under the rays of the influence of the forms of production. Another subterfuge, only more obvious still. Exactly what forms of production? An empty phrase. But partly they became dissolved in their own continuation and generalization in national ties. And so, national ties are a continuation and generalization of Gentile ties. Mr. Michalowski evidently borrows his ideas on the history of society from the tales taught to school children. The history of society, this copied book maxim runs, is that first there was the family, that the nucleus of every society. This is and this is what he says about the nuclear family. This is a purely bourgeoisie idea. Separate small families came to predominate only under the bourgeoisie regime. They were entirely non-existent in prehistoric times. Nothing is more characteristic of the bourgeoisie than the application of the features of the modern system to all times and all people. Exactly. This is funny because when they talk about traditional marriage was when two landowners, it was like a mutual hostage exchange between two landowners seeking to merge their common estate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was
like
it was
I give
open
your son
property.
and I give you my son, you give me your daughter, and now I know you're not gonna renege on our deal.
Yeah. Yeah. It was all like contracts, like business contracts, basically.
Exactly. And so he's right. They still do that nowadays with traditional
Yeah.
families. So traditional marriage is that basically. Um, and family has always been changing structure. There was who gets included in the family, who doesn't. Like it's all social.
Yeah.
Then we are told the family grew into a tribe, and the tribe grew into a state. Into the state. No, that's not. There was a tribe that considered themselves family, and eventually it became a state. And then once the state happened, they started to sanction a particular type of family that was useful for them. If Mr. Mikhailovsky with a solemn air repeats this childish nonsense, it merely shows, apart from everything else, he has not even taken the slightest notion of the course taken even by Russian history. While one might speak of the Gentile life in ancient Rus, there can be no doubt that by the Middle Ages, the era of the Muscovite Tsars, these Gentile ties no longer existed. That is to say, the state was based on associations that were not Gentile at all, but local. The landlords and the monasteries acquired peasants from various localities, and the communities were purely territorial associations. But one could hardly speak of national ties in the true sense of the term at that time. The state split into separate lands and sometimes even principalities, which preserved strong traces of the former autonomy, peculiarities of administration, at times their own troops. The local boyars went to war at the head of their own companies, their own tariff frontiers, and so forth. Only the modern period of Russian history, approximately from the 17th century, is characterized by the actual amalgamation of all regions, lands, and principalities into one whole. This amalgamation, most esteemed Mr. Mikhailovsky, was brought about not by Gentile ties or even by the continuation and generalization. It was brought about by the increasing exchange among regions, the gradually growing circulation of commodities, and the concentration of all small local markets. I need to stop myself from going into screensaver now. And into a single all-Russian market. Since the leaders and masters of this process were merchant capitalists, the creation of these national ties was nothing else than a creation of bourgeoisie ties. By both his factual references, Mr. Mikhailovsky has only belabored himself and given us nothing but an example of bourgeoisie banality. Banality because he explained the institution of inheritance by procreation and its psychology, and nationality by Gentile ties. Bourgeois because he took the categories and superstructures of one historically definite social formation, and that based on exchange for categories as general and eternal as the upbringing of children and directly sexual ties.
I was like as you're reading that in my head, I'm like thinking like, you're going through all this about and I always kind of think of Italy with the family things like whenever they talk about that, because it was so evident that the families each had like their own little region for the history that I know. And then
Medici era, or like we're basically one family.
yeah, like around that era. Like I always think that, but then I was like, oh, maybe that is like company towns. Maybe that's where they started pushing like we're a family in a company town. Like that's where my head was going. So yeah.
Yeah, and the definition of family is different throughout the world now, and it changes constantly.
Yeah, but they always try to tell you in you're working for a corporation. They try to tell you you're part of the family.
And what's really interesting about families ties is that in some cultures, marrying your cross cousins is not considered incest, but marrying your parallel, marrying your mother's brother's child is not considered incest. That's cross cousins. But marrying your mother's sister's child is considered incest.
Yeah.
In some cultures, it's kind of strange, but it's incest, not incense.
Yeah.
What is highly characteristic here is that as soon as our subjective philosopher tried to pass from phrases to concrete facts, he got himself into a mess. And apparently he feels very much at ease. This is not over clean position. There he sits, preening himself, splashing filth all around him. He wants, for instance, to refute the thesis that history is a succession of episodes of the class struggle. And so declaring with the air of profundity that is extreme, B says, the International Working Men's Association, formed by Marx and organized for the purpose of the class struggle, did not prevent the French and German workers from cutting each other's throats and despoiling each other. Sometimes he avers, which proves that materialism has not settled accounts with the demon of national vanity and national hatred. Such an assertion reveals the critic's utter failure to understand the very real interests of the commercial and industrial bourgeoisie constitute the principal basis of this hatred, and that to talk of national sentiment as an independent factor is only to obscure the essence of man's matter. Incidentally, we have seen what a profound idea of nationality our philosopher has. Mr. Mikhailovsky cannot refer to the international except with the irony of Burenin. Lenin used the name V. Burenin, a contributor to the reaction Novaya Vremya. Novaya Vremya means new era, new time, as a synonym for dishonest methods of controversy. Novaya Vremya, unfortunately, got revived after the fall of the Soviet Union. Marx was the head of the International Working Men's Association, which, it is true, has fallen to pieces, but is due to be resurrected. Of course, if a nec plus ultra of international solidarity is to be seen in a system of fair exchange on which the chronicler of home affairs expatiates, what does that word mean? Can somebody look it up? Janet, can you look up what expatiates means? With philosophy, banality of number 2 of Ruskaya Bogatstva. That means Russian wealth. And if it is not understood that exchange, fair or unfair, always presupposes and includes the rule of the bourgeoisie, and that the cessation of international clashes is impossible unless the economic organization based on exchange is destroyed, then it is understandable that there should be nothing but sneers for the international. Then one can understand that Mr. Mikhailovsky cannot grasp the simple truth. What's the simple truth?
Do you want me to tell you what expatiate means?
Yes, please.
It means to speak or write at length or in detail.
Okay. Bloviate.
Okay. Now, what's the simple truth?
Then one can understand that Mr. Mikhailovsky cannot grasp the simple truth that there's no other way of combating national hatred than by organizing and uniting the oppressed class for a struggle against the oppressor class in each separate country. Then by uniting such a national working class organizations into a single working class army to fight international capital. As to the statement that the international did not prevent the workers from cutting each other's throats, it is enough to remind Mr. Mikhailovsky of the events of the Commune, which showed that the true attitude of the organized proletariat to the ruling classes engaged in war. What is particularly disgusting in all this polemic of Mr. Mikhailovsky's is the method he employs. If he is dissatisfied with the tactics of the international, if he does not share the ideas in the name of which the European workers are organizing, let him at least criticize them bluntly and openly, and expound his idea of what would be a more expedient tactics and more correct views. As it is no definite and clear objections are made, all we get is senseless jibes scattered here and among the welter of phrasemongering. One cannot call this but filth, especially if we bear in mind that the defense of ideas and tactics of the international is not legally allowed in Russia. Such too are the methods, so in Tsarist Russia, censorship was very, very heavy. So you had to have like a stamp of the Tsar before you could publish your newspaper. That means all legal newspapers basically had to approve, had to have a Tsarist point of view, and he had to approve of every single thing. So of course, Lenin started an illegal newspaper, and there were many, not just Lenin, the Narodniks, many organizations started illegal newspapers because they wanted to spread the truth as opposed to have it be rubber stamped. So being a legal newspaper itself is a sneer. It's kind of like how we sneer at MSNBC. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Yeah. No, it's yeah. Yeah, because at that time, it's like us calling, like we call it mainstream media now. So what
Yeah.
he's saying is like you can't trust their
Legal
media.
newspaper.
You have to trust the stuff that is coming out from the people.
From the underground. And of course, I mean, you couldn't trust it because for it to be legal, it had to have that royal stamp.
Yeah.
And they didn't get the royal stamp if you're going to talk about overthrowing the czar or whatever. Such too are the methods of Mr. Michalowski employs when he argues against the Russian Marxists. Without taking the trouble to formulate any of their theses consciously and accurately, so as to subject him to direct and definite criticism, he prefers to fasten on fragments of Marxist arguments he happened to have heard and to garble them. Judge for yourselves. Marx was too intelligent and too learned to think that he who discovered the idea of historical necessity and conformity to law of social phenomenon, the lower rungs of the Marxist ladder. This is Lenin's footnote. Regarding this meaningless term, it should be stated that Mr. Michalowski gives a special place to Marx, who is too intelligent and too learned for any critique to be able to criticize any of his propositions directly and openly. After whom he places Engels, not such a creative mind. Next, I actually think Engels is more of a creative mind than Marx, in my opinion.
I think Engels is easier to understand.
He's a better writer.
Yes,
in English, at least.
Yeah.
He's more straightforward than Marx.
Yeah.
Next, more or less independent. Whoa, another Kautsky praise. Okay, these are rare, and it's going to stop very soon. Next, more or less independent men like Kautsky and then the other Marxists. Well, can such a classification have any serious value? If the critic is dissatisfied with the popularizers of Marx, what prevents him from correcting them on the basis of Marx? He does nothing of the kind. He evidently meant to be witty, but his wit fell flat. Do not know this, that the idea of historical necessity is not something new invented or discovered by Marx, but a long-established truth. Marx didn't claim that he invented that idea either.
No, he more makes it evident that he didn't invent it, that he was turning it on its head and stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like he
gets like Hegel's ideas of dialect. Exactly.
Yeah.
Or at least they have only a vague idea of the centuries of intellectual effort and energy spent on the establishment of this truth. Of course, the statement of this kind may very well make an impression on the people who heard of Marxism for the first time, and in their case, the aim of the critic may be easily achieved, namely to garble, scoff, and conquer. The word used it is said about Mr. Michalowski's articles by contributors to Russkaya Bogatstvo, Russian wealth. Anybody who has any knowledge at all of Marx will immediately perceive the utter falsity and the sham of such methods. One may not agree with Marx, but one cannot deny that he formulated with utmost precision those of his views which constitute something new in relation to the earlier socialists. The something new is consisted in the fact that the earlier socialists thought that to substantiate their views, it was enough to show the oppression of the masses under the existing regime, to show the superiority of a system which every man would receive what he himself produced, and to show that his ideal system harmonized with human nature. Michael Parenti has a great piece on human nature, by the way.
Yeah, he really does. Yep.
Yeah. With the conception of a rational and moral life and so forth. Marx found it impossible to content himself with such a socialism. He did not confine himself to describing the existing system, to judging it and condemning it. He gave a scientific explanation of it, reducing that the existing system, which differs in different European and non-European countries, to a common basis, the capitalist social formation, the laws of a functioning development which is subjected to an objective analysis. He showed the necessity of exploitation under that system. It is just the same way he did not find it possible to content himself with asserting that the socialist system harmonizes with human nature, as was claimed by the great utopian socialists and their wretched imitators, the subjective socialists. But this same objective analysis of the capitalist system, he proved the necessity of its transformation into a socialist system. Exactly how he proved this and how Michalowski objected to it is something we shall have to refer again. That is the source of those references to necessity which are frequently to be met among Marxists. The distortion which Mr. Michalowski introduced the whole question is obvious. He omitted the whole factual content of theory, its whole essence, and presented the matter as though the whole theory amounts to the one word, necessity. One cannot refer to this alone in complex practical affairs. As though the proof of the theory is that this is what historical necessity demands. In other words, saying nothing about the content of the doctrine. He seizes only on its label and started to pull faces at that which was simply the worn out coin. He had worked so hard to transform into Marxist teachings. We shall not, of course, try to follow up his clowning, but we are already sufficient. I'm glad Mean Lenin has already come out now.
Yeah.
In 1894.
It makes it more, I don't know,
entertaining.
Fun to read.
Yeah, no, I like Mean Lenin.
Yeah.
Let him cut capers for the amusement and satisfaction of Mr. Burnham. It's kind of like, who's the Hackett? Thomas Friedman. Mr. Burnham was like the Thomas Friedman of their era. Who, not without good reason, patted Mr. Michalowski on the back in Novaya Vremya. So, yeah, I mean, if Thomas Friedman praised me, I'd be kind of upset too. Okay. Novaya Vremya, New Times, is a daily paper that appeared in St. Petersburg from 1868 to 1917. It belonged to different publishers at different times and repeatedly changed its political line. At first, it was a moderate liberal, but from 1876, it became an organ of reactionary circles among the aristocracy and the bureaucracy. From 1905, it became an organ of the Black Hundreds. After the bourgeoisie democratic revolution in the February of 1917, it gave its full support to the counter-revolutionary policy of the provisional government and conducted a furious campaign against the Bolsheviks. On November 8th, 1917, it was closed down by the Revolutionary Military Committee of the Petrograd Soviet. Lenin called Novaya Vremya a typical example of the venal press. Yeah, they were starting to incite like massacres against the Bolsheviks, against workers and things like that. So then, like they were shut, and they were also trying to like recruit people for the white armies. So then they were like, okay, go away.
Now, were the white armies were the white armies?
They're like the KKK.
Yeah, so it was almost like the civil, like the little groups they were creating around here too, like.
They're exactly like the KKK. They wanted to put rebelling peasants back in their place as peasants and not as rulers.
Yeah, and then they end up becoming the fighting for the monarch, right? Fighting.
Well, no, this is after the monarch was overthrown. So these were people like when the monarch was there. They had the entire Russian Imperial Army as their personal. The landlords had them as their personal mercenary force, right?
Okay, so these are just like the.
So then the Bolshevik Revolution happened,
yeah.
And so the officers in the monarchy's army were. There's like a huge difference between how officers lived and how soldiers lived. Actual soldiers had to live on these like little barracks. They didn't have blankets. They had to use their coats as blankets. And then there was not enough air in the barracks. So like diseases like diphtheria was very common. And the soldiers in the beginning of the war, they got sufficient food, but then like the rations got cut down, but the officers could still enjoy like foreign wines, and their order of pay is like a huge, like it's a big difference.
Yeah.
So the soldiers, once the Bolsheviks, this is the one mistake he made. All the czars, all the soldiers in the Russian Imperial Army had to be centralized here in Petrograd, and they were all in barracks. And guess where the Bolshevik Party started? Here. So the Bolsheviks could actually go to soldiers and say, hey, they are saying that Germans want to steal land from Russia, blah, 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 but this is actually why they're fighting the war, because British and German want each other's colonies, and do you really want to die for this crap? And so it was really easy to revolutionize the soldiers and turn them into Bolsheviks. So in the beginning of 1917, they started, and most soldiers came from really poor peasant communities, ordinary soldiers. And did they really want to die for this inbred jackass? And so there was massive desertion. The people, like in 1916, they just like, okay, I'm checking out. 3 million of them just were like, F it, let me go. And then, so then the soldiers started to fight, like actually turn against did exactly what Lenin said, turn your guns against the ruling class. But then there were the officers and the landed bourgeoisie, and they formed, so right after the revolution, with the help of the US for Kaledin and Kolchak, UK for Denikin and Wrangler, Germany for, I can't remember exactly who, but another counter-revolutionary general, they formed the White Army. So the West basically gave them shitloads of weapons and shitloads of money, and with that, they were able to recruit some soldiers. But what was really surprising is, so the New York Times sneered when he says, like, oh, Lenin claims that the Red Army is going to recruit 1 million people. They recruited 2 million people.
Yeah.
So this was more like people wanted to die for a better life. They were okay with it.
Yeah.
And so the White Armies were extremely cruel. In fact, Winston Churchill told Denikin to tone down his anti-Semitism and not to like kill every Jew in his path, because that would look bad if on Winston Churchill. Kolchak basically wanted to burn down an entire hospital because there was like 5 patients with tuberculosis, and he's like, "Oh, they're just peasants. We don't care." And he ended up like going and like cutting off people's breath, like they were and chopping off their limbs, etc. So they were. So the White Armies were basically not very popular. They didn't enjoy any popular support, but they were able to maintain themselves for about a year or two because of all that money that was flowing in from the West.
Yeah. Do you want, before we go on, do you want to address a question?
Let's address questions. Let's look. Okay, go.
What do you say or share with those who claim that Marx denounced socialism and therefore socialism as well as communism should not be tried because it killed X amount of people? Black Book of Communism.
Who asked this question?
There is YepX.
Okay. Where did he go? I don't see him here. Weird.
I have it up on the screen.
What would you say? Okay, first I would add, this is 2 parts. First, Marx denounced socialism. Which text? Where did he denounce it? Citation needed. Because you are making the positive claim, it is your duty to provide the citation. The second, socialism should not be tried. Okay, do you know how many people capitalism has killed? Okay, first of all, let's look at the methodology the Black Book of Communism uses about killed in socialism. So they count people murdered by the Nazis before the Red Army could go and help them. That's definitely not socialism. Didn't kill any of them. That was capitalism. Then they count the Red Army soldiers that were killed by the Nazis, and then they count the Nazis that were killed by the Red Army. So like that's where they come up with their ridiculous number, and then they just multiply that by 100 and make up that number. So I would dispute that number. But capitalism. Okay,
they also included births that didn't happen because abortion was legal.
Okay,
they included that.
You don't ever know how many births didn't happen.
Yeah.
That's just yeah, that part is at least egregious. And I remember one victim of communism list. So there was a Serbian fascist who killed a Croatian fascist, and they listed both of them as victims of communism, but neither of them were communists. So I would say that's just capitalism. Okay, let's see how many people are killed by capitalism. Well, okay, so how many people? First, you have to add everyone killed, all the First Nations that were killed in the American genocides. How many people were killed by all the wars, like the Spanish-American War? You add that. Then let's add everyone killed in World War I, because World War I happened purely because of capitalism. The Spanish-American War. Then the Spanish flu that happened as a result. We have to add that to victims of capitalism.
Yep.
Oh, let's not forget all the people victims of social murder that Engels mentioned.
The ones that died in the Dust Bowl too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then yeah, and then the ones that died in Holodomor too. That's victims of capitalism because the kulaks burned all the crops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we should add everyone from World War II as victims of capitalism because fascism was just capitalism on steroids. Korean War, that's clearly victims. Vietnam, AIDS, victims of capitalism. All this, it goes well into the billions.
Mm-hmm. And then the fact that 68,000 in the United States die a year for having treatable, preventable death things with because of our healthcare system.
In third world countries that die because of Westerners, because of the medicine patents and how Westerners won't let third world countries make their own manufacturing. Yeah. So I would say like over 80% of the people who die every year are victims of capitalism.
And there's more than one author of that Black Book of Communism, and all but one of them has said, "Oh, that no, they have like pretty much denounced the book. Like they didn't realize that they're what it was being used for. They didn't, like they were saying like this is not, these are not deaths because of communism." So there is people that
the Black Book of Communism is just complete nonsense. Yeah, it's just
it has some tie to like an English spy.
I'm sure it's filled with former Nazi collaborators from all over the world. Yeah. Basically, they are more offended that a poor peasant has a gun and he can tell the bourgeoisie, okay, you have to pay workers this wage, no child labor. Like that is what offends them. That it's coming from a poor peasant with a barrel of gun. Mm-hmm. Like they're totally okay with, for example, in the in Congo, like 80% of mines have armed guards forcing people to work in those like cobalt mines. Yep. It even has children as young as 4 working there. But that doesn't offend them because that they think that is a natural order of things. Like the white man has a gun and the black man is enslaved. But yeah, they're just merely offended by the possibility of that ending.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, somebody said, Final Thought had a really good point about company towns, Janet. I can see the connection you're drawing. No wonder companies feel like cults.
Yeah.
Okay, Daryl Davis said, I read it in French, mind you, but Marx denounces anarchism in the 18th Brumaire. Oh, yeah. He also has a whole series of funny letters to Proudhon where he like makes fun of anarchism all the time.
Yeah.
Lenin does the same thing in his book, Communism, Left-Wing Communism in Infantile Disorder. Oh, yeah. And Stalin calls anarchism, he says anarchists show nothing but their ignorance.
Yeah.
Let him pay his respects to Marx, yelp at him from round the corner. His controversy with the utopians and idealists is one-sided as it is, i.e. as it is without the Marxists repeating its arguments. We cannot call such sallies anything but yelping. Because he does not adduce one single factual, definite, and verifiable objection to this polemic. So that, however, was willing we might be to discuss the subject, since we consider this controversy extremely important for the settlement of Russian socialist problems. We simply cannot reply to the yelping and can only shrug our shoulders and say, mighty must the pug dog be if at the elephant he barketh. A word from Aye Krulow's fable, The Elephant and the Pug Dog. Without interest, it is the next thing Mr. Mikhailovsky has to say about historical necessity. It reveals, if only partly, the real ideological stock in trade of our well-known sociologists. The title enjoyed by Mikhailovsky equally with Mr. Vivi among the liberal members of our cultured society. He speaks of the conflict between the idea of historical necessity and the significance of individual activity. Socially active figures err in regarding themselves as active when, as a matter of fact, they are activated. marionettes manipulated from a mysterious underground by the imminent laws of historical necessity. Such, he claims, is the conclusion to be drawn from the idea that he therefore characterizes as sterile and diffuse. Oh, this is the same thing. Whenever you criticize like imperialism, like people are like saying, in modern times, they're like, are you saying Ukrainians have no agency? I'm like, yes, that is the definition of being a colony, is that your agency is removed and an imperial force controls your government.
Yeah.
Like that is literally the definition of imperialism.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Probably not every reader knows Mr. Michalowski got all this nonsense about marionettes and the like. The point is that this is one of the favorite hobby horses of the subjective philosopher. The idea of the conflict between determinism and morality, between historical necessity and the significance of the individual. He has filled realms of paper on the subject and has uttered an infinite amount of sentimental Philistine nonsense in order to settle this conflict in favor of morality and the role of the individual. Actually, there is no conflict here at all. It has been invented by Mr. Michalowski, who feared, not without reason, that determinism would cut the ground from under the Philistine morality he loved so dearly. The idea of determinism, which postulates that human acts are how do you pronounce that word? Necessitated. Is that it?
Sorry. Sorry, I was reading a comment and then I was necessitated. Yeah.
Necessitated and rejects the absurd tale about free will. In no way destroys man's reason or conscience or appraisal of its actions. Quite the contrary. Only the determinist view makes a strict and correct appraisal possible instead of attributing everything you please to free will. Similarly, the idea of historical necessity does not in the least undermine the role of the individual in history. All history is made up of actions of individuals who are undoubtedly active figures. The real question that arises in appearing the social activity of an individual is, what condition ensures the success of his actions? What guarantee is that these actions will not remain isolated acts lost in a welter of contrary acts? This is a question answered differently by social democrats and by other Russian socialists. How must actions aimed at bringing about the socialist system attract the masses in order to yield serious fruits? Well, Lenin answered that question. Obviously, the answer to this question depends directly and immediately on the way in which this grouping of social forces in Russia and the class struggle which forms the substance of Russian reality are understood. And here too, Mr. Michalowski merely wanders all around the question without even attempting to formulate its... Hold on, I went back on screensaver. Where was that? Without attempting to formulate it precisely and furnish an answer, the social democratic answer to the question is based, as we know, on the view that the Russian economic system constitutes a bourgeoisie society from which there can be only one way out. The one that necessarily follows the very nature of the bourgeoisie system, namely the class struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie. Obviously, criticism that is serious should be directed against either the view that ours is a bourgeoisie system or against the conception of the nature of the system and the laws of its development. But Mr. Michalowski does not even dream of dealing with serious questions. He prefers to dispose matters with vapid phrase-mongering about the necessity being too general a bracket and so on. But then, Mr. Michalowski, any idea will be too general a bracket if you treat it like an egg from which you throw the meat and then begin playing with the shell. He means the yolk, not the meat. In Russia, like the whites and the yolk is called the meat of an egg, but in English, it's basically the yolk and the white. Yeah. But I love how Lenin uses a lot of food analogies, and it's good because they're timeless. Like everyone kind of understands what an egg is, and everyone knows what mayonnaise is. No,
it's a general thing that is not just to Russia, where some of the writers, they would have it specific to their area. So you were like, what does that mean? Like, I'm not getting that.
Yeah, but 90% of the, 99% of the world knows what an egg is and what, and just playing with it. This outer shell, which hides the really serious and burning questions of the day, is Mr. Michalowski's favorite speaker. Yeah, if you're talking about the shell of the egg, kind of missed the most important part of the egg, which is the yolk and the whites. And with particular pride, he stresses the point, for example, that economic materialism ignores or throws a wrong light on the question of heroes in the crowd. Pray note, the question which are conflicting classes that make up contemporary Russian reality is what its basis. It's probably too general for Mr. Michalowski. He evades it. On the other hand, the question of what relations exist between the hero and the crowd, whether it is a crowd of workers, peasants, factory owners, or landlords, is one that interests him extremely. Maybe these questions are interesting, but to rebuke the materialists for devoting all their efforts to the settlement of a problem that directly concerns the liberation of the laboring class is to be an admirer of Philistine science, nothing more. Concluding his criticism of materialism, Mr. Michalowski makes one more attempt to misrepresent the facts and performs one more manipulation. Having expressed doubt about the correctness of Engels' opinion that capital was hushed up by official economists, Lenin's footnote, see Engels' preface to the first edition of The Origin of the Family and Private Property, a doubt that justifies on the curious grounds that there are numerous universities in Germany, Mr. Michalowski says Marx did not have this particular circle of readers, workers, in view, but expected something from men of science too. That is absolutely untrue. Marx understood very well how impartiality and scientific criticism could expect from bourgeoisie scientists in the afterwards of the second edition of Capital. He expressed himself a very definite score on this. There, he says, the appreciation which Das Kapital gained in the wide circles of the German working class is the best reward of my labors. Herr Meyer, who is in economic matters, represents the bourgeoisie point of view in a pamphlet published during the Franco-German War, aptly expounded the idea of that the great capacity for theory, der große theoretisch Sinn, which is to be considered a hereditary German possession, had almost completely disappeared amongst the so-called educated classes in Germany, but that amongst its working class, on the contrary, that capacity was celebrating its revival. Yeah, and actually workers actually learned how to read in order to read Marx back in the day.
Yeah, you like Lenin used Marx to teach people how to read too, right?
Yeah. Lenin would have these Marxist study circles, and that's literally teaching workers how to read. And in fact, peasants would sometimes pay a local who couldn't read would pay a local schoolboy to come during lunch break and read to them while they're working on the fields.
Yeah. They would have them, and then later on they use that in factories too. They would have someone read to them as they were working in the factory.
The manipulation again concerns materialism, and it is entirely in the style of the first sample. The theory of materialism has never been scientifically substantiated and verified. Such is a thesis. The proof: individual good pages of historical contents in the works of Engels, Kautsky, another Kautsky, not trolling Kautsky, and some others also in the esteemed work of Bloss might well dispense with the label of economic materialism, since, in fact, they take the sum total of social life into account, even though the economic note predominates in the chord. And the conclusion: economic materialism has not justified itself in science. A familiar trick. To prove that the theory lacks foundation, Mr. Michalowski first distorts it by ascribing to it the absurd intention of not taking the sum total of social life into account. Whereas quite the opposite is in the case. Materialists, Marxists, were the first socialists to raise the issue of the need to analyze all aspects of social life and not just the economic. Then he declares that in fact that the materialists have effectively explained the sum total of social life by economics, a fact which obviously demolishes the author. And finally, he draws the conclusion that materialism has not justified itself. Your manipulations, however, Mr. Michalowski, has justified themselves magnificently. And this is actually the same tactics like anti-communists use, communism works in theory, but not in practice. I mean, what is working? Is it not being overthrown by capitalist states? Yes, many communist states have allowed themselves to get overthrown. That's sad. But when they were there, they improved the lives of their workers, of their people, by leaps and bounds.
You always have to look at the conditions they came from, and then what happened when they went to communism. And
Yeah, like
every
88%
single time.
illiteracy to 100% literacy, having
Yep.
people die from smallpox to 0 deaths from eradicating
life
smallpox.
expectancy, the childbirth rates, like everything was going up.
Exactly. So that's the first thing. And then they basically say that communists claim a utopia. No, they don't not claim a utopia. They claim that we want to change the way the articles of means of production are produced and controlled and distributed.
Yes.
So this is the same exact kind of disingenuousness that you hear.
Yes.
This is all that Mr. Michalowski advances in refutation of materialism. I repeat, there is no criticism here, but it is nothing but empty, pretentious babbling. If you were to ask anybody at all what objections Mr. Michalowski has raised against the view that production relations form the basis of all others, how he has refuted the correctness of the concept of social formation and the nature and of the natural historical development of these formations elaborated by Marx by using the materialist method, how has he proved the fallacy of the materialist explanations of various historical problems given, for instance, by the writers he has mentioned? The answer would have to be that Mr. Michalowski has raised no objections, has advanced no refutation, indicated no fallacy. He has merely beaten about the bush, trying to cover up the essence of the matter with phrases, and in passing has invented various paltry subterfuges. We can hardly expect anything serious of such a critic when he continues in number 2 of Ruskaya Bogatstvo. Remember, the name of the magazine is Russian Wealth, where they're criticizing Marxism to refute Marxism. The only difference is that his inventiveness in the sphere of manipulations is already exhausted and is beginning to use other people. He starts out by holding forth on the complexity of social life, why he says even Galvanism is connected with economic materialism because Galvani's experiments produced an impression on Hegel too. Wonderful wit. One could easily just as easily connect Mr. Michalowski with the Emperor of China. Back then, China had an emperor. What follows from this, except that these are people who find pleasure in talking nonsense? The essence of the historical process, Mr. Michalowski concludes, which is elusive in general, has also eluded the doctrine of economic materialism. Although this apparently rests on 2 pillars, the discovery of all the determining significance of the forms of production and the exchange and incontrovertibility of the dialectic process. And so the materialists rest their case on the incontrovertibility on the dialectic process. In other words, they base their sociological theories on Hegelian triads? No, obviously they don't. Here we have the stock method of accusing Marxism of Hegelian dialectics, and an accusation that might be thought to have been worn threadbare enough by Marxist bourgeoisie critics. Unable to advance any fundamental argument against the doctrine, these gentlemen fastened on Marx's manner of expression and attacked the origin of the theory, thinking thereby to undermine its essence. And Mr. Michalowski makes no bones about resorting to such methods. He also uses a chapter from Engels' Anti-Düring. Yeah, Anti-Düring is a hilarious book. As a pretext. Replying to Düring, who had attacked Marxist dialectics, Engels says that Marx never dreamed of proving anything by the means of Hegelian triads. Hegelian triads are like these thought experiments where they'd say, "Hey, this like." They were using dialecticism, but not materialism, because they were just like mental. It's kind of like what modern
you just go to the top. You have the thesis.
It's what modern day libertarians do with their like thought experiments. Like, suppose we have private police, private fire. You know what I mean? Like nothing they've described has ever actually happened in real life ever.
Yeah. The difference of like the triad and then to dialectical materialism, the way I always saw it was like you had the triangle and the triad for Hegelian, but then the dialectical materialism is a spiral because you keep going up and you keep answering the question that comes out of the contradictions.
Exactly. Hold on. Alex said, Rafait Al-Arief said, being stuck in the imperial court, all is well, all things considered. Oh, yeah. One day there won't be one, inshallah. that Marx only studied and investigated the real process, and that the sole criterion of theory recognized by him was its conformity to reality. If, however, it sometimes happened that the development of some particular social phenomenon fitted within the Hegelian scheme, namely thesis, negation, negation of the negation, there is nothing surprising about that, for it is no rare thing in nature at all. Engels proceeds to cite an example of natural history, the development of a seed, the social sphere, as instance that first there was primitive communism, then primitive property, then capitalist socialization of labor. Or that first there was primitive materialism, and then idealism, and then scientific materialism, and so forth. It is clear to everybody that the main weight of Engels' argument is that materialists must correctly and accurately depict the actual historical process, and that the insistence on dialectics, the selection of examples to demonstrate the correctness of the triad, is nothing but a relic of Hegelianism out of which scientific socialism has grown, a relic of its manner of expression. And indeed, once it has been categorically declared to prove anything by triads is absurd, and that nobody even thought of doing so. What significance can attach to examples of the dialectic process? It is obvious that this merely points to the origin of the doctrine and nothing more. Mr. Michalowski sees this when he says that the theory should not be blamed for its origin. But in order to discern in Engels' argument something more than the origin of the theory, proof should be obviously offered that the materialists have settled at least one historical problem by the means of triads, and not on the strength of the pertinent fact. As Marx says, like most historical problems happen as a struggle between classes, and then one class prevails. So usually it's kind of a war, unrest, and no one individual can solve the historical problem. So
yeah, and it just builds on. Like you're always just building off. You're looking at the historical. That's why you have historical materialism, because you're looking back and you're not like repeating that. You're building off that, and you just
exactly. So dialecticalism has not solved any historical problems. It has helped people understand what has happened before, or why something is something some way.
And there's this whole thing, like people, like it wasn't like new to think that way. It was just that like people didn't realize that they were doing it, and then Marx is saying like this is the way that we should like consciously be doing it. You know what I mean? It's not like people hadn't been kind of, keep asking the questions and keep doing the stuff. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Did Mr. Michalowski attempt to prove this? Not a bit of it. On the contrary, he himself was obliged to admit that Marx filled the empty dialectical scheme so full with factual content that it cannot be removed from this content like a lid from a bowl without changing anything. As to the exception which Mr. Michalowski makes here regarding the future, we shall deal with it anon. If that is so, why is Mr. Michalowski making so much fuss about the lid that changes nothing? Why does he say that the materialists rest their case on the incontrovertibility of the dialectical process? Why, when he is combating this lid, does he declare that he's combating one of the pillars of scientific socialism, which is a downright untruth? It goes without saying I shall not examine how Mr. Michalowski analyzes this example of triads, because I repeat, this has no connection with whatever, either with Marx's scientific materialism or with Russian Marxism. But there's one interesting question. What grounds had Mr. Michalowski for distorting the attitude of Marxists to dialectics? Two grounds. Firstly, Mr. Michalowski, as the saying goes, heard the toll of a bell, but whence it came he could not tell. Second, Mr. Michalowski performed, or rather borrowed from during, one more subterfuge. As to the first point, when reading Marxist literature, Mr. Michalowski constantly came across references to the dialectical method in social science and dialectical thinking, again in the sphere of social problems, which is alone the question and so forth. In its simplicity of heart, it were well if it were only simplicity. He took for granted that this method consists of solving all sociological problems in accordance with the laws of the Hegelian triad. Had he been a little more attentive to the matter in hand, he could have been convinced of the absurdity of this notion. What Marx and Engels call the dialectical method, as against the metaphysical, is nothing else than the scientific method in sociology, which consists of regarding a society as a living organism in a state of constant development, and not as something mechanically concatenated, and therefore permitting all sorts of arbitrary combinations of separate social elements. An organism, the study of which requires an objective analysis of the production relations that constitute the given social formation and an investigation of its laws of functioning and development. We shall endeavor below to illustrate the relation between dialectical method and the metaphysical, to which the concept, the subjective method in sociology undoubtedly belongs, by Mr. Michalowski's own arguments. For the present, we shall only observe that anyone who reads the definition and description of the dialectical methods either by Engels in the polemic against Dühring, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, and by Marx, various comments in Capital in the afterword, and to the second edition in The Poverty of Philosophy. That's where he's making fun of Proudhon. We will see the Hegelian tribes are not even mentioned, that it all amounts to regarding social evolution as the natural historical process of development of social economic formations. In the confirmation of this, I shall cite in extenso the description of the method given in Vestnik Evropy. That means European vision. Number 5, in the article, the standpoint of Karl Marx's critique of the political economy. The author of the article was Professor I.I. Kaufman of St. Petersburg University. In Marx's view, the article was one of the best expositions of the dialectical method, which Marx quotes in the afterwards, the second edition of Capital. He says that the method he employed in Capital had been poorly understood. German reviews, of course, shriek out at the Hegelian sophistics. And in order to illustrate his method more clearly, Marx quoted the description of it given in the article mentioned. The one thing of importance to Marx, it is there stated, is to find the law governing the phenomenon he is investigating, and of particular importance to him is the law of change, the development of those phenomenon and their transition from one form to another form. Consider one order of social relations to another. Consequently, Marx is considered with only one thing, to show by rigid scientific investigation the necessity of a given order of social relations and to establish as fully as possible the facts that serve him as a fundamental point of departure. For this purpose it is quite enough, while proving the necessity of the present order of things, he at the same time proves the necessity of another order, which must inevitably grow out of the preceding one, regardless of whether men believe in it or not, whether they are conscious of it or not. Marx treats the social movement as a process of natural history governed by laws not only independent of human will, consciousness, and intentions, but rather, on the contrary, determining the will, consciousness, and intentions of men. This is for the information of the subjectivist gentleman who separates social evolution from the evolution of natural history merely because man sets some self-conscious aims and is guided by definite ideals. Hey, can you take over the reading while I take a quick drink of water?
Yep.
Okay, I'll be back quickly.
Okay. So if the conscious element plays so subordinate a part in the history of civilization, it is self-evident that the critique whose subject is civilization can least of all take as its basis any form of or any result of consciousness. That is to say that not the idea, but the external objective phenomena alone can serve as its point of departure. Criticism must consist in comparing and contrasting the given fact with another fact and not with the idea. The one thing of movement is that both facts be investigated as accurately as possible and that they actually form, in respect of each other, different moments of development. But most important of all is that an equally accurate investigation be made of the whole series of known states, their sequence, and the relation between the different stages of development. Marx rejects the very idea that the laws of economic life are one and the same for the past and the present. On the contrary, every historical period had its own laws. Economic life constitutes. I know. You walked in, and then I got economic life constitutes a phenomena analogous to the history of evolution in other branches of biology. Earlier economists misunderstood the nature of economic laws when they likened them to the laws of physics and chemistry. A more thorough analysis shows that social organisms differ among themselves as fundamentally as plants or animals. Setting himself the task of investigating the capitalist economic organism from this point of view, Marx thereby formulates in a strictly scientific manner the aim that every accurate investigation into economic life must have. The scientific value of such an inquiry lies in disclosing the special historical laws that regulate the origin, existence, development, and death of a given social organism and its replacement by another and higher organism. Such is the description of the dialectical method, which Marx fished out of the mass of magazine and newspaper comments on Capital, in which he translated into German, because this description of the method, as he himself says, is absolutely correct. The question arises is so much as even a single word said here about triads, trichotomies, the contrability of the dialectical process, and such like nonsense, which Mr. Michalowski battles against so valiantly. Following this description, Marx says plainly that his method is the direct opposite of Hegel's method. According to Hegel, the development of the idea in conformity with the dialectical laws of the triad determines the development of the real world.
That's like exactly what libertarians do. Ideas.
Yep.
Let's imagine blah blah blah. Oh, jetpacks. No government, and people have jetpacks, so we don't need roads.
Yeah. Yes, we're going to have jetpacks instead. Yes. And it's only in that case, of course, that one can speak of the importance of the triads, of the incontrovertibility of the dialectical process. With me, on the contrary, says Marx, the ideal is nothing but the reflection of the material, and the whole matter thus amounts to the affirmative recognition of the existing state of things and of its inevitable development. No other role is left for the triads than that of the lid and the shell. I coquetted. Let
me look at what it means.
With the modes of expression peculiar to Hegel. Marx said in this same afterward, in which only Philistines could be interested. How then, we may ask, should we judge a man who set out to criticize one of the pillars of scientific materialism, i.e. dialectic?
Okay, coquette means to trifle in love, to stimulate affection, to attract the notice, admiration, to treat with a show of tenderness or with a regard.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. So he's saying I coquetted with the modes of expression peculiar to Hegel. So he, I don't know. He messed with them, I guess. I don't know. But not about what dialectical is, whether the development of society is really a process of natural history, whether the materialist concept of social economics formations as special social organisms is correct, whether the methods of objective analysis of these formations are right, whether social ideas really do not determine social development, but are themselves determined by it, and so forth. Can one assume only a lack of understanding in this case?
Okay, hold on. So let's look at some comments, and I might be getting tired because this is a long piece.
Yeah, what do we have left on it? And we have
about half of it left.
We got a lot left, yeah.
Yeah, so let's look at some comments and yeah.
All right. Yeah, and I'll make note where we stopped. Okay.
There's no comments. Okay, let's just talk about some nonsense. This is really funny. So I came across this PragerU video, and they were like, under communism, the government hides information from its people because they want to keep them in ignorance. And I was like, you effing idiots! 88% of Russia was illiterate before communism. So what's the best way to hide evidence is to keep people illiterate, right?
Exactly.
wanted people literate. And so, in fact, the Soviet government had very little, like there was so much communication, like well, because they didn't need to hide anything because they weren't doing anything, like they weren't sponsoring death squads in Central America on behalf of a banana company. So like, there's no need to hide anything from the people when you're not doing that.
Yeah. And like Trump hitting at Department of Education here, like our Department of Education has just always just pushed propaganda anyways. They don't really teach you anything other than you being a good little cookie cutter worker.
They don't even teach math properly. And you think math is not, whatever.
Yeah. Yep.
That's the one thing. Like, I understand not teaching history properly, but what's wrong? Why can't they teach math properly?
I don't know. Oh, did we lose you? Oh no, her camera might have gone out. I'll give her a couple of minutes. But yeah, so what we're doing here is we're reading through all the Lenins we started at the beginning. This was episode 6, so we're trying to get through this first part on this piece, which is, and I can't ever remember the name of it because it's a big long name.
She's back. Sorry, my camera ran out of battery.
That's what I figured. So I babbled.
And my camera ran out of battery. You guys didn't hear it?
No, it just went to black. It just went.
Oh, okay. Okay. I forgot. So that's the part I don't understand. Like you can, but maybe having a logical thinking, being able to have logical reasoning itself causes people to reject the hegemony. Maybe that's why they don't teach math properly. I don't know.
I mean, it's amazing to me. And this is the whole thing. Like in my head lately, like all I keep coming across is like people saying, "Oh, but individuality, like we have individualism. We can be who we want to be." And I'm like, "No, you can't. You don't like
it's not a society where you can't go to the grocery store and buy food. So, like that requires society. Your modern life requires a society. Like in the primitive, like you have to be like foraging for your own. Like individually, you're actually. That's why humans started being in bands, because even gorillas and baboons are in bands because they can use collective power to go catch fish or eat whatever gorillas eat.
But that's the whole thing. Like with the communism, they're like, you can't be an individual in communism. It's like, you're not individual. You're not even like you know, you have ADHD. I have ADHD. How much of your life did you have to sit there and mask your ADHD because you couldn't be yourself? You know what I mean? Like they
but what is individuality? Like it's like utterly meaning other than like individuality is code for government having no responsibility towards its towards the welfare of its citizens.
That's all it is, because you can't tell me that everybody's out there just being who they want to be. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, what individuality at capitalism extreme? What individuality does the child child slave who works in the mines in Congo have?
Exactly.
And it's funny because like when after the Soviet Union formed, children of like peasants would go on and become artists, and they learned how to read, then they could like be doctors, scientists, like, so the individuality is literally basically means having the government be responsible for the welfare of its citizens. Another anti-communist talking point. I'm working on that for this book because I felt like it needs a chapter 1 where I explain why is my book so different than all the other crap that's out there in the ether.
Yeah. So you read through Anti-Communism, Michael Parenti's?
I read lots of it. Didn't read through it because I was using some citations.
Yeah.
He makes a lot of sense in a lot of areas, but a lot of his examples are very specific to the Vietnam War era. So
Yeah.
that part is a little hard for people who are not familiar with what happened in the Vietnam War to translate for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
But basically, yeah, I mean, okay. Essentially, the arguments of the first one is communism only works in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. And it's like, dude, capitalism, it doesn't even work in theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and if anyone wants to read that, it is up on archive. You can borrow it on archive.org.
Oh yeah, you have to sign in as an account and download it.
I actually copied and pasted. I have it on a Notions that I have it shared out to whoever wants.
Yeah. So what they do is you have to download Adobe Digital Editions, and then it's kind of like borrowing from a library, basically. For like you're allowed like 7 days or something, and then they delete it from your system.
Yeah, but you can keep borrowing it too. But I copied and I figured it was an important book because it's out of print and you can't really find it.
Yeah, anything that's out of print. But so that's the first one. The second one is that revolutions always turn into a dictatorship. That's bullshit. What it is that the way that the American hegemony defines democracy is not actually the will of the majority, but by allowing capitalism.
Yeah.
So yes, revolutions will always put a curb on capitalism. That's the entire point of revolution. But they define that as a dictatorship. And another thing I understood is that there's deep down classism in anti-communism. Like they think that they are inherently superior to the illiterate peasant, to the child miner in Congo, to whoever, and that's why they deserve to be where they are in society.
Yeah.
So for them, the idea of the fact that a child miner in Congo can, if like given enough books, can build a better society than them, that really, to believe that, they have to then stop believing that they deserve what they have. So so it's kind of like, oh, poor peasants will always mess up the system because they're too poor and stupid. And no, they're not. They're actually smarter than you are. So that's kind of like a lot of classism in that thing, where it's like, poor peasants deserve to be poor peasants because they're
a lot of that mindset too. Like
because poor peasants are poor and stupider, they can't have their own ideas. They have to listen to some stupid, like some leader from above, like some Stalin. But that's just projection, them projecting how they feel about the poor peasant, as opposed to what is really going on, in that you oppress this peasant for centuries, and he's tired of it, and he has the ability to strike back, and he's doing that.
Yeah. I mean, and you can look at that even not from the poor peasants, but the people that are causing acts of violence here in the United States, which are
police.
No, on the other side, like they're, like the guy that just
he sounds kind of the Israeli embassy guy. There's very little known about him, and there are some news sites that cited his quote unquote manifesto, which I'm not sure I 100% can verify the authenticity of his quote unquote manifesto.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah, he was apparently, PSL denied that he was a member of PSL.
Yeah, I mean, he might have.
He attended like a one protest with them, but he didn't. He wasn't like in the committees, and he didn't do much with PSL.
Yeah. But I mean, you're going to get people like that's what's going to happen. You've created this situation because you're not addressing the issues that need to be addressed.
But sadly, these like lone wolf kind of incidents will not lead to actual change.
No, so they're not. They're just eventualisms, and they don't.
They'll get forgotten after a week.
Yeah,
And then
Or sometimes they make it harder for actual revolution because then, the bourgeoisie gets to kind of
yeah,
tighten up.
exactly. But that's where the idea of the evil dictator or the secret Jewish conspiracy like comes from, because these people can't believe that somebody they think inferior to them won.
Yeah.
And then of course there's the thousands of quote unquote victims, and like for example, this is one thing I discovered when they say like I was arrested for no reason. Well, when you look at the Soviet archives, the reason is very clear. For example, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was arrested in January of 1945. Remember this date, 1945, January 18th, for attempting to create an anti-Soviet organization. What were these and other? What were other anti-Soviet organizations? The UPA, who ended up like murdering people from. So he claims he didn't have, and the same statute that he claims that just like allowed him for quote unquote critiquing Stalin, had other like offenses to it, like engaging in acts of terrorism, engaging in industrial sabotage, and so so he claimed, but he's too embarrassed to admit that I was a Nazi sympathizer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's another book that was not translated into English, where on chapter 1 he says the very first Bolshevik government: 1 Russian, 1 Georgian, and 17 Jews.
Yep.
And then he goes on to say the NKVD had, like, Russia had a population of X percent of Jews, but Y percent was like in the NKVD. And in fact, Timothy Schneider also advances this stupid argument that Stalin was anti-Semitic because he promoted Jews to the highest levels of government without discrimination, and he should have known that would piss off Nazis.
Yeah, it's his fault for doing that.
Which is like the opposite of, I mean, like, so basically he should have had a crystal ball, known that Nazis would come and they would be upset and make the Jewish officials targets. I mean, that's just like crazy.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing of like, you shouldn't address like racism, or you shouldn't address this, or you shouldn't address that. It's the same kind of thing. Like he's just putting the people there that should be there. You know what I mean? Like, these are people that should be in those positions, but it has nothing to do with them being Jewish or not. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But back to this one. Like, so Alexander Solzhenitsyn said like he got arrested for writing a letter critiquing Stalin. Not quite. He got arrested for, I guess, he did criticize Stalin, but also formed an illegal terrorist organization on Soviet territory in the middle of World War II, which means like he got off light, like, right?
Yeah.
Only 8 years in. And so that's often where they're like, you can be disappeared for no reason. Like they say, like these anti-communists say you can be disappeared for no reason. That's because they're too ashamed to tell the reason why they were sent to jail.
Yeah, there's always they always tell on themselves somewhere. Like but you get that even with like the right wing ops and stuff that we have now, that they'll say, why are you saying that I am a white supremacist? Why are you saying that? And it's like, okay, because I just read like your 5 last tweets. Like, and, like everything.
You guys were exactly. So yeah, that's where the disappeared. It's like, yeah, if you're probably too ashamed to mention, like after 1945, like in 1949, you're not going to be saying like, oh yeah, I was a Nazi sympathizer, and then I end up like murdering babies by bashing their heads against tree trunks. Like, that's not going to get. So that they're like, I got disappeared for no reason. They just targeted me.
And we know that the Nazis actually did win didn't really lose because they're still all around. But
they changed forms, is what I'm saying.
Yes, they changed forms, but like those people that are like, I don't know what I did wrong, would have been friggin' celebrating, and do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, it's funny how a lot of anti-communist propaganda is just reactionary fears and reactionary mouth foaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then once you kind of understand their context, okay, so, yeah, you're like, everything makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's very telling that the victims of communism like have to put people like Ante Pavlich, who was the head of the independent state of Croatia. Like there are so many Nazi sympathizers or Nazis or genocidal maniacs there because they can't actually find actual victims that we would be sympathetic to.
Yeah. 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 It's like, I don't know. It's just so funny because it's like, you know, how you were saying, like, it's one person is a victim and another person's a victim, and that they're all just like Nazis fighting each other too and killing each other off, and then they're communism. Like, like, just because one bourgeois element killed another bourgeois element, it has nothing to do with communism.
Yeah, like Alexander Hamilton got shot by
what's his face?
Alfred Burr?
Burr, yeah, Burr.
Aaron Burr.
Aaron Burr, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That has not, like, that's just weird. Like, why does Athena do all? We don't know. This is weird, but that's not indicative of anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just funny, and then like before, like the one that we Bex, who was asking about, you know, the you know the what the ops always bring up and stuff like that, and then saying, oh, you know, you're saying, oh, like, look at this war, and them going, oh, are these numbers all put together, which people have. I mean, there's I think, was it Cobra put up a piece someone did, but
yeah,
it's
let's discuss this. This is funny.
It's actually it's more of a, like, okay, it's just kind of bullshit, because like for everything that they say, like communism causes X amount of deaths. Like, if you look at capitalism, like, you just have to look at capitalism.
Yeah, those deaths are usually caused by capitalism.
Yeah.
Okay, so the culprits. I got banned for threading Jackson Hinkle. Lol, I screenshotted it from my next Twitter account. Funny thing is, my original Twitter is still up with my full legal name and half naked body. Like 20 years ago, I almost made a Twitter, used my full legal name, posted myself naked in bed, then immediately forgot my password. Page is still up, low. Don't let the infra-chuds find it. I'm kind of hoping they do. Why though? They can't possibly be talking about me if they are lows. I'm busy planning out my. Hold on. So, Cobra, what was the context? Why did they ban you? Yeah. They just. I don't.
Yeah, like, why? Because you were.
The issue, yeah, they are just have lots of photos, and I don't know what they do besides having photos. They take lots of photos, is what I noticed.
Who?
The American Communist Party.
They take their little photo, which is really weird. Those are supposed to be like, oh, look, we're doing work, but you never see like community in them. You just see them holding bags.
Photos, and I'm like, okay, enjoy yourselves.
And then you got Hinkle likes to put himself, like, he likes to
Photoshop himself like he once photoshopped himself with Maduro, and yeah, and he then it's like, oh, that was a joke. But the way he photoshopped it is that he wanted to fool people.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's just they're just so silly. The whole thing is silly. It's just like, I mean, like, I I go at them every once in a while, but I like getting a young one who's not like, who's just a member and paying dues, and then I try to get them to read stuff.
But where are the Jews going, and why are they paying dues? I don't know.
The dues are going to Haas.
Real, are they? Okay, somebody I feel like these things they should kind of look up, and then I see Unhinged Discord things where Haz yells out profanity at people and like says really unhinged things.
Yeah, he does.
And it's
Well,
like, okay.
So what Haz wanted to do was he told they all each. So you start your own little
Circle?
whatever. No, you start your own little club in your area of ACP. And what you have to do is you have to be making money and you have to give money to the party. And,
That
and
sounds
one of
like
the
a
things that you can do is you could be a landlord because landlording is okay.
Wait, this sounds like a Ponzi scheme or a multi-level marketing scheme, right?
And yes, and landlord getting this money by being a landlord is okay.
Okay. Well, for me, I guess if you're a landlord and you're supporting some revolutionary organization, good. That's a good use of your money. So that doesn't bother me so much.
But the organization isn't a revolutionary organization.
No, it sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme.
Yes. Yeah. So,
like, what is the other one? Like the Avion products, right? Like the makeup products.
Yeah, Mary Kay and Avon.
Oh, yeah, Mary Kay. There's another one. Herbalife.
The Herbalife. There was one. My mom did one that was like it had like cleaners or something. I don't know. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, Herbalife is those are like where you have to like they'll send you these products that you have to pay for and then try to sell it to your friends. But then like if you're selling these stupid products that no one wants, your friends are going to stop being your friend and you get ignored and isolated. And then but in order for you to recoup your costs, you have to recruit like 5 other people or 10 like X amount of people who are going to then sell the product, and you're going to get a commission from that. But then usually it just spirals downwards from there. Like they usually end up losing.
Yeah. All ACP is basically doing is yelling at they go after communists if they care about anything else. Like, they go after communists that are not class reductionists. But
they're not even class reductionists. They're actually anti, like they reject the class warfare and they twist everything that every communist scholar has ever said.
Oh yeah. They use.
I mean, no communist has ever like a class reduction. Like Lenin had a really good analysis of racism in the United States.
Yeah.
So it's like they basically think that if you don't harp about race, gender, other things, sexuality, feminism, etc., they think that the reason why white working males are not into socialism is because they're turned off by all these things.
Yeah.
But that's not what you do. You have to explain it's in their economic interest to work with all these people, and which is what Lenin did in Tsarist Russia. They're like, hey, you can't be anti-Semitic because it's not in your interest. There are so many Jewish proletariats out there. You have to unite with them, and then you can fight the Tsar better. Like that's kind of what they did.
Yeah.
So you like even Lenin has articles about not bowing down to the prejudices of the average person, but elevating the person to a Marxist level of consciousness.
Yeah, to understanding it. Like you'd rather like you should go in there and go, okay, like I get that you think that of this group of people, but like really they're not your enemy. Like you need to be explaining it like that to them, you know what I mean? But and then like what they do is they use like they're basically a party of petty bourgeois because they want to be landlords, they want to be petty capitalist, like they want to do this, and they also denounce like they don't want they think the lumpen has no and we could you can have your ideas on the lumpen or whatever, but they also think like people working at Starbucks aren't workers.
But the thing is that most working class white people are not racist. They are working with other people who are Latino, Indian, Chinese, Black. Like most of the racists are the like upper middle class, and so like it's like they don't even understand the average worker.
Yeah.
most white workers are not unionized because there is no union in their area. Like, it has been decimated. They don't know what to do, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the ACP would do gomperism. Like, they'd be fine with the ACP.
Exactly. Like, they don't. Yeah. I mean, like, okay, first of all, they project these stereotypes or prejudices that most actual workers do not have.
Yeah.
So, like, it's like they're hanging out with their like in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. It's like one of the wealthiest suburbs, like, houses from. And like, he lives in Lansing, Michigan, but whatever. Okay, maybe he's not from there. I don't know, but I thought he was. But whatever. And yes, the people there like built a wall to keep Black people out. They're very racist, but that is not the same as the Starbucks worker or the worker who's working in one of the plants or the restaurant worker. Like, that's not, your neighbors are not that.
No,
And
they're going
not
for
the same prejudice as your neighbors.
They're definitely stuck on the skilled worker stuff. Like, they'll go
They're
for
not even skilled workers. All workers are skilled workers. Like,
I know.
Yeah.
But he's going for exactly what Samuel Gompers would call, like, you know, the skilled worker compared to, you know, the undesirable. But that, I mean, that's what I feel like. That's what, you know, and they're like, you have no good, like, all you say is, you know, you just don't like Haas or something like that. I was like, no, I have plenty. And every single time you tell them, you know, this, and this is wrong. They just don't pay attention to it. So
yeah, exactly. To me, it's kind of like an MLM scheme. If they start selling, like, I don't know, vitamin products, let me know. Let's see. Let me see if Cobra has okay. Hold on. He has some more. Okay. Haas is a low cow. He can go to Ohio for 2 years and do all kinds of fun stuff. And when I come back, Haas will still be wearing a mask on an alt account telling his trolls to help him. Some ACP, I can go to Ohio. You're from Michigan too? I'm a fellow Michigander. Some ACP members have my phone number. I have theirs. Not joking. So the fact these members haven't doxed me means I'm doing fine. So let's wait for 2 more minutes to see whether Cobra has other things to follow up.
Anything else? Cobra, are you done with your story?
Yeah.
They just, I mean, they really irritate me because they insist to call themselves Marxist-Leninists, but then they're like, oh, but we can reform this and that, and we're perfectly fine with this and that. And I'm just like, just don't call yourself Marxist-Leninists then. Just
they don't have any theory reading sessions. Like, they are not even studying Marx or Lenin.
No.
That's the most important thing. Like, are you reading every day or every week? Or are you trying to understand what they said? Or what is the concepts? They're not reading. They're not even reading, which is the bare minimum.
They don't encourage them to read.
Exactly.
They don't encourage their members to read, and at least encourage them to read and have like things up that, you know, and
meetings where you read it and discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're doing here, like trying to help people understand, like.
Yeah.
All right, I think Cobra might be done. There was a big lag. I will tell you, there was probably about a 30-second lag today.
Oh, okay. Somebody also said they Rip Rafayette Al-Rare says they mine quotes out of context. Yeah. It's really
the thing I love doing with that is Folk Vulture mostly. I will type out the entire, because he will not cite where it comes from. If you take something he puts out, and you know it's a clip from an old book he's getting from one of these like JSTOR or like something like that, and he just like takes a screenshot of what he wants to show you. I will tell you, like, half the time it's going to be an anti-communist or a Zionist or even an FBI informant he's used before. So always check what he's writing, because he will never say who it's from. And sometimes he even attributes things. This is what I was saying before. He took a quote from something, I think it was Lenin, it could have been Marx, wrote, but it was a quote that Lenin was using from somebody else. And he said that it was Lenin. So
that's really bizarre.
always check always try to see.
Oh yeah, Norman Finkelstein, and I do that too. You'd be surprised. So when I was looking through Timothy Schneider's book, he was talking about some. I kid you not, there was this long paragraph of some kind of starvation, and he mentioned a bagel. And the only thing that his citation verified was a recipe for that bagel. None of the other things he said was actually supported by that citation.
But yeah, Bulk Vulture is British. That was because I'm like, oh, you're just, because he's like, I can't join. I was like, oh, so you're just telling me you're either from Australia or England.
But Britain and Australia have their whole host of Trotskyite communist organizations, but the Trotskyites are 10,000 times better than ACP.
Yes, true. Which is a lot, especially coming from Asha.
No, they are a lot better. There's no comparison.
So, all right.
Okay, with that, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.